Thirdly, schism, say the authors of the Covenanter's Plea in page 32, signifies properly a rent or breach, which, when it is from or in the community of a church, is very sinful, both because against the command of God directly and interpretively, but it must be from the communion of a church walking according to the divine rule. Otherwise, if the church's deviation especially be great, there is no fear of any guilt of schism in departing from it, unquote. Fourthly, it may also signify a cutting or section in a solid body, as in the cleaving or riving of wood, where the parts of it, before united, are rent asunder. I am of the mind that none of these four cases can justly be applied to Presbyterian dissenters in regard, number one, they have neither altered nor departed professedly from the doctrine, worship, discipline, or government terms of communion, nor the reformed principles of the Church of Scotland as legally established in 1649, and so are not guilty of any breach of union from that church. Our separatists must prove this before they can justly charge dissenters with schism. Number two, the above grounds of dissent sufficiently evince that their refusing communion with or secession from this Revolution Church is not causeless, and that her unsoundness in constitutions, principles, doctrine, worship, discipline, government, and terms of communion, etc., are some of the causes, and schism being always theirs who are the causers of it through defection and corrupt courses, it cannot be charged upon dissenters. Number three, that this Revolution Church is not walking according to the divine rule, but palpably deviating from it. Our confessions of faith, covenants, national and solemn league, and have made acts contrary to the confession, as is asserted and declared in the protestation given in to the Assembly 1720, against the acts condemning the marrow of modern divinity, as above, seems to screen Presbyterian dissenters from meriting the designation of schismatics or being guilty of schism. Hence, until this church clearly prove that our reforming church foresaid did not walk according to the divine rule in her doctrine, worship, discipline, government, terms of communion, acts and constitutions, etc., and that the covenants, national and solemn league, sworn by the authority of church and state with uplifted hands to the Most High God, were not lawful, and consequently not binding on posterity, they may forbear for all time coming, while matters continue on the present footing with them, to charge Presbyterian dissenters with schism, seeing that they adhere to and desire, through grace, to own and prosecute the principles and attainments of that reforming period according to Christ's institution. But I come to the other branch of the assertion, namely, that this Revolution Church, in separating from the Reforming Church, etc., is guilty of schism. Very little needs to be said for proving this point, for abstract from their fractions, divisions, party business, and party names, such as Squandronian and Argothalane, Simpsonian and Anti-Simpsonian, etc., and intestine broils and unbecoming reproaches shot forth from some of the non-jurants and the 12 brethren for their adhering to and contending for truths condemned by the plurality men, and some small opposition to the Arian flood, which yet insinuates something like schism in the body, 1 Corinthians 12:25. They have made an open, avowed, and causeless schism, and separating from a well-constituted church, and sound in doctrine, worship, discipline, and government, from a church whose constitutions, principles, actings, and proceedings were more agreeable to the divine law than any since the apostolic times, which cannot be forsaken and left without being involved in a direct schism and manifest perjury, which is very sinful, both because against the command of God directly and interpretively. And sure I am that they never had just causes to leave that establishment, at least they are not produced. If any should examine the nature of presbytery, which was framed by that great restorer of presbytery in Europe, Mr. Calvin, in Geneva, carried on by famous Mr. Knox and his associates in Scotland, compared with the primitive platform instituted by Christ and his apostles, they will find it, by many degrees, different from the methods and plans used and pursued these many years by state politicians and exasperated men, who are evidently more actuated by carnal, self-interested, biased spirits than by the Spirit of the Lord Jesus Christ. I say, anybody may easily see that this nominal presbytery, that is now on foot, differs so very vastly from the true nature and true and pure being of presbytery, according to Christ's institution carried on so sweetly and valiantly by our reforming fathers, that scarcely is there anything in it relative to it, but its overreaching excrescences, as famous Mr. Dixon speaks in his Warning to Fife, obtruding upon people insufficient ministers against both their consciences and privileges. Furthermore, not only the above heads, complexly considered, prove that this church hath made an unwarrantable separation in principle and practice from our comely reforming covenanting church, but the solemn league and covenant in the 1st, 2nd, and 6th articles thereof, about which this church has never to this day kithed any concern, except in casting it out of the confession of faith, as the Pharisees did the blind man, when they excommunicated him because he confessed Christ. As it does plainly show wherein the union of the church consisted, so also would his schism from her. And these words particularly in the 6th article, namely, quote, that we shall assist and defend all that enter into this league and covenant, in the maintaining and pursuing thereof, and shall not suffer ourselves directly nor indirectly, by whatsoever combination, persuasion, or terror, to be divided or withdrawn from this blessed union and conjunction, whether to make defection in the contrary part, or to give ourselves to detestable indifferency and neutrality in this cause. Unquote. When this account is compared and considered with the words in the 1st article, to wit, quote, that we shall sincerely, really, and constantly, through the grace of God, endeavour, in our several places and callings, the preservation of the Reformed religion in the Church of Scotland, in doctrine, worship, discipline, and government, against our common enemy, etc., and shall endeavour to bring the churches of God in the 3 kingdoms to the nearest conjunction and uniformity in religion, etc., all schism therefrom being renounced in the 2nd article. Unquote. I say it is plain from these articles compared with one another that the union of our covenanted church consists in this, that is, that the members thereof firmly and steadfastly adhere to and defend one another in the maintaining and pursuing the ends of the covenant, that is, in performing all the duties to God and man that the Word of God and the true Reformed religion require for preservation and propagation of the covenanted Reformation in these 3 kingdoms, Scotland, England, and Ireland, according to the tenor and obligation of our solemn vows, in opposition to whatsoever combination, terror, or persuasion that may come in the way thereof. It is also evident from this, that schism from our covenanted church consists in this, to wit, when the members of the church make defection to the contrary part, that is, in plain terms, when they associate or incorporate with, assist and defend the parties against whom the covenants were made and sworn, that is, papists, prelatists, and their underlings, heretics, etc., the common enemies of Reformation, and fall from the duties of preserving and propagating the Reformation of the 3 kingdoms, and refuse to join with, assist, and defend those who adhere to the covenants, the necessary work of renewing them, for extirpation of popery, prelacy, Erastianism, superstition, heresy, error, and profaneness, and whatsoever is contrary to sound doctrine and the power of godliness, and for re-establishing, preserving, and propagating the covenanted Reformation once so happily established in these lands and sworn unto by our covenants. Furthermore, schism from our covenanted church consists also in this, that is, when members, ministers, or others give themselves to a detestable indifferency and neutrality in the cause of God, namely, in the preserving and propagating the covenanted Reformation of these 3 kingdoms, that is to say, when men are like to so many gallios in the cause of God, preferring worldly ease, honor, and wealth, their own interest to the interest of Christ, become easy, whether the covenanted Reformation in these lands sink or swim, and from a cowardly disposition in some, and a malignant, perfidious temper in others, coalesce and accord in apostatizing from the articles of the covenant aforesaid, the cause of God, and its honest-hearted friends, and frighted from both, as if they thought it both sin and shame to have it said that they carried any warm side to either the one or the other. I say all members of this national church who, on account of any combination, persuasion, or terror and fear of worldly loss, or sufferings of whatsoever kind, are guilty in any of these 2 cases, are also guilty of making schism from the covenanted church, as is clearly manifest by the 6th article of our solemn league. Now, seeing this church is notoriously and grossly guilty of making defection to the contrary part, by altering, or rather departing from the legal establishment, 1649, changing the terms of communion, and by going into the legal establishment of the incorporating union with England, whereby Erastian supremacy and English popish ceremonies are established, and the jurants, by the abjuration oath, have solemnly ratified that union as proven above, then it plainly follows, by just consequence, that this Revolution Church is not only guilty of schism, and the jurants most heinously guilty by their oath, on account of the foresaid defection and sinful deserting of the foresaid establishment, etc., but also in respect of neutrality and indifferency in the cause of God, in never making any suitable endeavors to have that glorious work revived and restored, or her own lost ground retrieved. And so she is allowed to apply the heinousness of schism, the bitter effects, the lamentable concomitants thereof, to herself, which she endeavors to father upon and apply unto Presbyterian dissenters. Any who have not rejected our covenants, and design not wilfully to trample on that Reformation, may be fully satisfied as to this sense in the Solemn League and Covenant from the printed acts of the Venerable Assemblies, Anon, 1645, session 14, page 283, 1647, session 15, page 334, and 1648, session 21, page 391 and 392, in their explications of that 6th article of the Solemn League and Covenant. I come now to answer some objections ordinarily adduced by ministers and others of this church against Presbyterian dissenters, such as objection number 1, quote, England and Ireland have formally broken the Solemn League and Covenant by the re-establishment of prelacy, etc. Therefore it is not binding on Scotland. When two parties are carrying a barrow, if the one throw down the one end of it, the other is not bound to bear up the other, and so in the present case, unquote. Answer. First, the Solemn League and Covenant was not made betwixt Scotland, England, and Ireland only, but betwixt the Lord and these three nations. Hence the violation of that covenant by England and Ireland can never, whilst the world stands, free themselves or Scotland from the religious observance of such a moral duty. Yea, in regard to this moral duty antecedently binding to any solemnity, had the God of truth, who is a covenant-keeping God, and the punishers of the covenant breakers for the one party and these three lands for the other, heaven will not, earth and hell cannot loose one soul therein from the binding force thereof. Secondly, albeit I make no comparisons betwixt this covenant and the 4th commandment, yet, by the same parity of reason, as often as England and Ireland break it, Scotland may do the same, if imitation may be lawfully sustained and followed in the violation of sacred ties. Yea, by virtue of the same reason it will follow that Scotland may openly declare themselves in favours of prelacy, embrace the Book of Common Prayer, with all the rites and ceremonies in the English liturgy, depending on that hierarchy, throw off presbytery, name and thing, and deny they stand in any relation to our confessions of faith, etc., because England and Ireland have done so, which revived standards were expressly promised in the 1st article of the Solemn League and Covenant, and really made in prosecution of the ends of that covenant, as parts of the covenanted uniformity in religion, betwixt the churches of Christ and these three kingdoms. But this objection is clearly answered by the Venerable Assembly of the Church of Scotland, 1649, in their brotherly exhortation to their brethren in England, page 474, where they declare that the Solemn League is still standing and binding upon the three nations, that one nation's breaking it does in no manner of way free the other, nor any person therein, and say that it is only that man of sin who assumes that power of dispensing with oaths, that they all such as claim that power unto themselves, as they join with him in his sin, so must they expect to partake of his plagues, etc., which barrow will be more heavy to bear than the duties of the said covenant. How dreadful a thing it is to break and abjure covenants, materially and formally binding, and what direful judgments perjury hath brought on in all ages, is clearly shown from sacred and profane history in the apologetical relation from page 327 through 359, printed in 1665.